I want to come back again to this idea of how science fiction is functioning in this translation space and as a potential tool to use to get people to flag folks to the problems before they become too late to solve. I heard you say something like, you brought up this word urgency and the need to sort of get people to respond before we get past the point of no return. And I want to ask you, before you get to the, there's a point of like peak indifference. And you need to get people to respond before things get so bad that it feels futile. How well do you think that's going? Because I remember, talking to a friend of the show, Dave Sirota, about, the movie Don't Look Up that he did with Adam McKay. And there was this hope that we're going to pop culture this thing. We're going to, make this sort of parody of how senseless the media coverage is, how indifferent our political institutions are, to an even more urgent threat than climate change, which is this asteroid hurling at the Earth. The movie is, commercially successful, but it didn't exactly wake up the public the way, in a fantasy, in a best case scenario, you get the kind of urgency. And of course, we have books like 1984 that get referenced every time something a little dystopian happens. That's been around for going on, 100, a very long time.
70,
the better part of a century,
Yeah.
And while you hear people all across the political spectrum use it to sort of add a sense of foreboding or urgency to whatever their cause is, even if they are the bad guy in the scenario, it doesn't seem to really pack the urgency punch that we would like it to have. So I do wonder how you feel about that in actuality.
So look, it's definitely the case that these stories work on somewhere between retail and wholesale. So it's not just like you influence one or two people. You definitely influence crowds of people. And if you're lucky, you influence very large crowds of people or very influential people. And I am sure that there are people who watched David's movie and walked away from that going like, this is really important. We need to do something about it. And I know that that's the case with my fiction because, when I go to these hacker conferences like DEF CON, it's just a stream of people who come up to me and say like, I got involved in computer security because I read your book about, so I wrote a trilogy of young adult novels. Well, the first two are young adult novels. The third one's for adult, called the Little Brother novels. And they're about hacker kids in San Francisco who, after a terrorist attack, turns the city into like an armed police state, declare war on the Department of Homeland Security and use a network of cryptographically secured hacked Xboxes to coordinate guerrilla warfare that kicks the DHS out of San Francisco and restores the Bill of Rights. It's real like kind of teen adventure stuff. It's basically like leftist Red Dawn. And but with a lot of technical stuff, like a ton of really sharp technical detail where the story and not just like for its own sake, but like figuring out really cool things you can do with the plot with things that are real about how technology works. And I meet all kinds of cryptographers and security experts and so on. I call them Tron pilled because they fight for the user. And they have gotten involved in this sector not to figure out how to like sell ads to you or stop you from blocking ads or spy on you or manipulate you or whatever. They've gotten into it to defend you. And so I have a little botnet of like guerrilla fighters who came about as a result of this kind of fiction. And I think that that's real and important. I've also influenced some people at like who've done some really significant things. So there's a scene in Citizen 4, Laura Poitras's documentary about Snowden, where he's about to bug out of his hotel in Hong Kong and he's grabbing everything he's going to take with him on the road. And he grabs the book he's reading off the bedside table, and it's the sequel to Little Brother. And so, like it's definitely a thing that works to a certain degree. But to score, what happened with Orwell, and I would quibble slightly with your characterization of what happened with Orwell, because I think Orwell held the line for a long time. I think for 50 years, and during the kind of post-war peace dividend, when we had all this technology and we were trying to figure out what to do with it, we had money because we weren't bombing the shit out of each other anymore, and we were trying to figure out how to deploy it, that there was this time where why don't we just spy on everyone could be usefully countered with, well, because that would be Orwellian, Bob. And, and I think that faded, but it faded after like half a century. Right.
There's an argument I've heard. Yeah. There's an argument that I've heard in a slightly different context that says the fact of the Cold War and the fact of, the Soviet Union forced America to get its ducks together in some ways. He didn't want them pointing out American racism, so we have a civil rights movement. You don't want them making us look bad, so we had to stand up to our ideals, live up to our ideals a little bit better. And in that context, I can see a world where, we don't want to be like them, and Orwellian and dystopia. Like, it makes a certain amount of sense.
Yeah.
But
and so,
since then...
So, look, I don't think we can argue that it is sufficient, but we can say that it is necessary and helpful, right, to have narratives about what technology can do. If nothing else, if the stories foster a more nuanced understanding of technology. So you have, I would associate myself with a school of tech criticism that rejects Shoshana Zuboff's surveillance capitalism ideas, which I think, boil down to big tech built a mind control ray to sell your nephew a fidget spinner, and then Robert Mercer stole it and made your uncle a QAnon. And I think that it's not, it is not well evidenced that anyone has ever built a mind control ray. And claiming that Facebook has a mind control ray just helps them sell ads. That's why they claim it.
She means that literally. I assume she meant it metaphorically.
She means it metaphorically. She means that you take some warmed over, largely non-replicable Skinnerian behavior modification and you throw an algorithm at it, and then all of a sudden you can control people. She's like, you don't have one of her ideas is the right to the future tense. Right. And she's like, you don't have a future tense anymore once big tech can spy on you and shape your behavior. And I think big tech does shape our behavior in the sense that, if they don't let us talk to people or see what other people are saying, that shapes your behavior. Amazon sells the search results for their search engine. So they make $38 billion a year doing this. The first search result on a search result page is not the best match for your link. It's the one they got paid the most to put there. It's on average about 29% more expensive than the other ones that the best match for your query. So on average, our behavior is being shaped, and we're paying 30% extra to, Uncle Jeff's Fun Time Giant Store. But it's not because he's got a mind control ray. It's just because he's cheating, right? And it's much less sexy and interesting to say oh, yeah, it's not that you're being manipulated by behavior modification. You're just being scammed. If you walk into Best Buy and you say, sell me your cheapest batteries, and they sell you batteries that's 30% more, and you don't think to check, they haven't, they're not geniuses for doing that. That's just a con. And so I think that if you know where to put the criticism of tech, right? If you know what's wrong with tech, because don't get me wrong, I think tech is rotten. I think the companies are rotten. I think that the fact that they break laws with impunity does make people vulnerable to conspiratorial beliefs, right? If you live in a society where institutions fail routinely and these guys are poster children for it, and someone says, hey, the people in charge don't have your best interests in at heart, and they're colluding with industry to poison you and kill you, that is a very plausible thing in a world where the Sacklers got $10 billion and the FDA sat by while they poisoned and killed us, right? And so I do think that monopolies make us conspiratorial, because a monopoly is a conspiracy in the sense that they capture their regulators and all the people in the sector are friends with each other and so on. It's just not it is neither QAnon, adrenochrome drinking Davos goers, nor is it the Zuboffian idea that there was a good capitalism that used price signals to allocate things, and then we got a rogue capitalism. This is more or less what her argument boils down to. Then we got a rogue capitalism that, rather than getting price signals by figuring out what you're prepared to spend by offering you things, instead could control your mind so that you bought whatever was being offered to you, and then the price signals broke down and the economy became poisonous, and that we can make it better by if we only all bought our apps on the iPhone instead of getting ad-supported apps on Android, everything would be fine again. And I think that's a bad technical critique.
It it's interesting, the distinction that you're making between mind control and scamming, because there's an argument that they're like right there on a sort of a spectrum of the same thing, and that the overlap between sort of cults, the kind of the line between an influence campaign, advertising, and something akin to a cult and the mind control that we think of in those sort of like psychosocial relationship scenarios are just, a little bit farther down a linear path of all the same thing.
It's a difference of degree, but not of
degree,
kind,
not kind.
Yeah,
exactly. I've heard you talk about, and in a really interesting way, and I invite you to do so here, scams, multi-level marketing scams, in particular, the way that those scams have been enabled by legislation that, importantly, at the time, not enough people were urgent enough about stopping, aware enough to stop before they created a dynamic that legitimized and made legally viable, legally protectable certain kinds of scams that continue to prey on us today. And in the context of new technology, and in the context of aspects of the big beautiful bill, some AI legislation, the recent Facebook litigation, we are seemingly inundated with a bunch of laws that are going to have enormously more effect than the multi-level marketing, the laws that enabled multi-level marketing.
Ponzi schemes.
This is why you always
Ponzi
schemes.
Yeah.
In the past.
Okay, so I mean, I think that well, where to start here? So first of all, Ponzi schemes, right? So the story of Ponzi schemes is really a story about regulatory capture. So Ponzi schemes are a scam in the sense that they're grounded in a lie. There is an aspect of control, right? Where they are, they're doing that cultic thing of asking you to abandon your social milieu and isolate yourself so that it's very hard for you to know, to what extent you're being lied to and to get second opinion, as you're being led. I mean, if you've ever been conned, by someone, you'll know that it's like a series of seemingly reasonable steps that add up to something very unreasonable. And oftentimes, if you speak to someone else in the middle of it, when you're sort of 80% of the way there, and you say, "Oh, I'm just about to go and famously put $50,000 in a cardboard box and hand it to a stranger," they'll go, "Are you nuts?" Right? Like, yeah, sure, a set of seemingly plausible steps led to this, but it's not the same as it's not that you like necessarily got had your mind controlled, right? It's that you were kind of seduced, right? And like, there are a lot of people who believe that they are good at controlling people's minds when really what they're doing is just tricking them. So you probably know there's this like misogynist movement called pickup artists.
Yeah,
these
it was
guys
big in college.
Yeah, and
you
they read
peacock, you got to wear a fedora.
Yeah,
you got
yeah,
a neg.
and they have these lines. They got a neg. They have these it's basically a warmed over, discredited thing called neurolinguistic programming, which is basically the idea if you say the right words in the right order, you can bypass people's critical faculties and get them to do anything. And what they are doing, I love this phrase, they're Texas marksmen. So they fire 1 million shots and then draw a target around the place where the bullets went in and declare themselves to be a deadeye. So those guys, what they actually do is just hit on every woman they see. And eventually someone is like inattentive or naive or self-loathing enough that they go home with one of them. And they're like, see, it works. Right. And
so you think it's purely a numbers game. You think, Cory, that like if a man were just to hit on every woman in a bar, every person in a bar, you would think that they would have the same odds as if they hit on everybody using the
I think the techniques
strategy.
I think if anything, they'd have better odds because about 10 seconds after this movement kicked off, every potential partner for a man looking for a partner in a bar had encountered this and discovered how just wildly obnoxious it was and was immediately discounting as a partner anyone who used these tactics.
True. I think that's true, but I also think it's a little bit like, okay, in the early days of the internet, I think many of us might have fallen for phishing scams that we don't fall for as easily now because we're aware of phishing scams. But that doesn't mean that they don't. There's not maybe a kernel of a there as to why those strategies.
Yeah, so you can
I don't know why I'm defending pickup artists.
You can trick people who've never encountered a trick, right? So like, I love going to like Denver, and they've got like the warehouse district, and they've got like the ghost ads on the sides of the warehouse from the turn of the last century, and there's like an ad that's like, use Pond's soap, 5 cents, you will be clean. Right. And clearly, like, there was a time where people were like, well, they wouldn't paint it on the side of a building if it wasn't true. Right. And now it's like, oh, Axe body spray will make you a love god. Right. Because like sure, there's a place where you don't have a callus. And so you've got some tender flesh there and you get pricked there. But then you immediately develop a scar and it stops being a vulnerability. So yes, there are some like tricks that are you'd be vulnerable to once or in a moment of great inattention. I wrote an article a little while ago about last year when I got phished by someone who called pretending to be my bank, and it was just like they called like it was right after New Year's. I was in New Orleans. I just used 2 ATMs, one of which refused, and the other one was like a really dodgy credit union ATM because I have like a 1-branch credit union. They've got like a finder for other ones, but it was this really cheap Chinese one, and I was like, oh, this looks like it was like made by wasps chewing up cardboard and then building an ATM with the stuff coming out of their mouths, and so someone calls with my bank's return number. My bank doesn't have their own fraud department. They outsource it to one that works for a bunch of credit unions. I had just used 2 ATMs like the day before, and they were like, did you just buy an iPhone in New York? And I was like, oh, I know what's happened. God damn it. I've got an hour till it's time to leave. My family's at home. I've gone out to get a muffaletta, my favorite sandwich in the world. I'm nearly at the sandwich shop. What is it going to take to get you off the line? Right. Mm-hmm. And so like in that moment, I gave him a lot of information, and then I tried to call back, and it was the day that the 747 MAX lost its door plug. And so we went to the airport with plenty of time, but it was super lined up because everyone who was on a 737 MAX that day got rebooked. And so took forever to check in. So I had 2 minutes at the gate. So I called the fraud department, and I pressed lost and stolen card instead of fraud, which was like number 2 on their voice menu instead of number 3. And they were like, well, if you've already spoken, you're in the wrong department. You've spoken to the other guy, you're fine. Right. And so I was like, okay, I'm fine. Right. And it wasn't until Monday that I went into the bank and they were like, oh, you weren't speaking to our fraud department. You were speaking to fraudsters. But it was just like this moment where everything lined up. So, now I'm kind of inured. Right. The next time that happens, I'm going to do what everyone listening to this should do, which is anytime someone from your bank calls, you take your bank card out of your wallet, you look at the phone number on it, you say, what is your name? I will call and ask to speak to you. Yeah. That's it. That is like the foolproof method. Right. But like, it doesn't mean that this guy had a mind control, right? It doesn't mean that he was doing an amazing trick. He was just, he made 1 million calls that day, and he got someone who had just used an ATM and had their card rejected in the middle of the French Quarter, and then asked them if they'd bought something in New York, and I filled in the rest. And it was a perfectly reasonable thing.
But there is no mind control. I guess what I'm resisting is that there is no, you're the tech expert.
Right.
As far as I know, there is no actual mind control, and everything that we do think of as mind control and is a kind of seduction. Is the seduction that happens in cults? Is the seduction that happens with QAnon? Is the seduction that happens with, mainstream political cultism? Is the seduction that happens romantically? And it always operates like this. They hit on some vulnerable point.
Sure.
Negging works if you have low self-esteem, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work, right?
Well, if you have low self-esteem and if you haven't encountered negging 10 times in the last hour, right? If you've encountered, it doesn't matter how low your self-esteem is. If 10 guys come up to you and they go, your hair looks like shit, right? And you're like, are you negging
you gotta
me?
have a softer touch. You gotta have a softer touch with the
or
neg.
Whatever,
it's more like, oh, it looks great messy like that. I like girls who don't comb their hair.
Yeah. I like girls who don't think too much about their appearance. Yeah.
Right,
I can tell you're not vain. But like the 10th time someone uses that, it's like the use Pond soap, 5 cents, it will make you clean. So you're right that there are people who are vulnerable to it once, but the number of like durable persuasion techniques, right, that endure for an audience after exposure is very small. Right, even vulnerable people. Like, you can only convince someone that $9.99 is not $10 so many times before their mind just starts turning $9.99 into 10. You can only tell, like, Trump tells different lies, right? He doesn't tell the same lies. He's got different stories, right? He's got different ways of talking about what he's doing. Like, it's not the same con every time, because a certain fraction of his audience wises up to the con with each one. And you know,
you think they do,
I do,
given some of the bad numbers we've seen. What was the new poll came out a couple days ago that showed Democrats' favorability is still worse.
Oh, that's not about Trump. That's about Democrat. Like, the only thing that Trump says that's true is Democrats suck. Right? I mean, you know, there's a little ping pong paddle that would like a word with you, you know, if you think otherwise. You know, like, there's a guy to Page and Cory Booker, you know, like Chuck Schumer to the white telephone. Like, they suck. Like, that's why Democrats have an unfavorable number. You know, I mean, we can talk about the realpolitik of that, but like, I think that it's true that repetition and isolation can cause people to believe untrue things for a long time if they are isolated and there's a lot of repetition, right? And I do know people who've gotten into cults and who were mired there over long time skills, but that's why cults do this isolation thing. And it's not how big tech works. I mean, big tech does cut you off from alternate sources of information, but not by like punishing you for using something else, but by just having a monopoly. I think we have to distinguish. I think there's a useful distinction to be made between, like, I knew someone who he was kind of a seeker, and he moved to Staten Island, and he got involved with this cult that was, they would only tell the truth all the time, and they owned a thrift shop, and they would all work in the thrift shop, and they weren't allowed to really talk to anyone who wasn't in this group, right? And we have to distinguish between that and the fact that 90% of all searches happen on Google because they spend $25 billion a year buying every search box so that you will never find a search box that isn't wired to Google's backend. And so no one invests in making better search engines. And so if Google has like a deliberate or accidental mistake in its search results, that's the only information you're ever going to see. That's a really different prospect from the cult leader saying, like, you're not allowed to talk to other people who aren't in the cult.
I mean, it's obviously different. It's different. In terms of our ability to sort of overcome it, to unisolate ourselves, to push back. I don't know. I think there's some meaningful comparisons. I mean, it's interesting. I remember I had a boss when I was still a lawyer who was conservative and was obviously older than us. This is fresh out of law school. And he used to, despite us having differences of opinion, he was, you know, a Republican. He thought we were all very naive about privacy issues. He saw us all hopping on Facebook or whatever. This was back when Facebook was still like a good guy in the public, in the liberal public imagination. We all wanted to work there. You know, I was a year behind Zuckerberg in school. Like, everybody wanted a Facebook job when you graduated. You thought you could do good in the world by doing well, all of this crap. And he thought we were being really naive about giving our information away. And he was right.
Yeah.
But
well, look, was he a libertarian or like a Mormon or something?
He was a regular.
Those people were on it early because, like, I
think he was just a regular Republican. I don't think he was a special libertarian, although, you know, that's been an influence in the party, and especially was back around the Tea Party era, which is
right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, on privacy, I think you're right that this is a right-left issue, and that might be how we get some movement on it, because Congress. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, all that is to say that I think our response to him as, 25-year-olds was, it's not that we are indifferent to what you're saying, but what do you expect of me? To not be on Facebook? I don't have a choice. It is the monopoly problem. And it is what which you've obviously spoken about at great length, the further isolation that happens when you're forced to give up your entire community, which now exists online, in order to protect your privacy. And now we're all just, I'm a lawyer. And me and my lawyer friends, we all joke, we click through every contract without reading them.
Yeah.
And, what are you going to do?
Well, but this is where, getting back to popping the stack like three layers up, this is where being a smart tech critic is really important, because there are many hypotheses for how Facebook got here, right? So you could say, oh, Facebook got here by melting our brains, right? By like using big data to manipulate us into thinking we needed Facebook. And so then we became addicted because evil techno wizards were hacking our dopamine. Or you could actually look at the material phenomena that created Facebook as a significant platform. So first of all, Facebook, the way that it resolved the problem that people were having with MySpace, which was that they hated MySpace, but they liked their friends, and solving what economists call the collective action problem, getting everyone to go at the same time. You can't get like 6 people in your group chat to agree what movie you're going to see on Friday. You're never going to get 200 people on Facebook to agree or MySpace to agree it's time to leave for Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg gave those users a bot, and you give it your login and password, and it would go to MySpace several times a day, grab everything waiting for you, put them in your Facebook inbox. You could read them and reply to them, and it would push them back out to MySpace. So you didn't have to, make this stark choice between the people you loved and the platform you hated. You could modify the technology unilaterally, something we call adversarial interoperability, when you make one thing work with something else without permission. This is like the moving fast and breaking things that I like, right? Moving fast and breaking a billionaire's things. And that was a thing that you could do with Facebook. But Facebook, as it became a dominant platform, leaned into ever more extreme theories about IP and contract law to say that doing this would be, once it was wrapped up in an app, you could say doing it is a violation of Section 12.1 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which is a felony punishable by a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine for a first offense. And you could say that it violates the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act by violating their terms of service. And you could say that it was you were a tortious interferer with their contracts with their users, and all these other things, basically this thicket of IP and contract law that made sure no one ever did onto Mark Zuckerberg as he did onto Rupert Murdoch. And then, people still began to really hate Mark Zuckerberg more than they loved their friends. And they started to defect to another platform called Instagram. And when Instagram had 12 employees and 25 million registered users, most of whom were not logging in, Mark Zuckerberg bought them for $1 billion. And his CFO sent him an email, and Mark Zuckerberg works late. So at 2:30 in the morning, he sent the CFO an email back going the reason we are buying this company for so much money is that our users prefer it to Facebook. And if we own Instagram, then even if they leave Facebook, the platform, they will still be customers of Facebook, the firm, which is putting the premeditated murder in writing. And Bob, just so you know, this killing, it's a murder and we're premeditating it.
Yeah, Matt Stoller was just talking about this on the show recently.
Oh, really? Yeah, I love Matt.
Yeah.
So but the Obama DOJ waved it through, right? The Obama FTC waved the merger through, because so did every other merger get waved through by every other administration since Reagan. And so you have this legal policy failure that happened. And then how did Facebook manage to monetize so thoroughly this user base that it had? Well, the last time Congress updated privacy law was in 1988, when they signed the Video Privacy Protection Act, which bans video store clerks from telling newspapers which VHS cassettes you have. And Congress hasn't made a consumer privacy law since then. And so,
why is every law about porn? Because I feel like Matt was about, don't tell people the pornos I'm checking out.
It was about porn and Robert Bork, because it was during the Robert Bork confirmation when the Washington Monthly got his video store rental history. It turns out the least objectionable thing about him was his taste in movies. He had pretty good taste in movies. He was a virulent racist and a Nixonite criminal. But that guy was probably an okay hang if you let him choose the movies and you didn't ask him about anything else. But yeah, it was, this was, and of course after that happened, Congress was oh shit, my video rental history, not so clean as Robert Bork's. So, these are it's not that Facebook trapped us by hacking our dopamine loops. They trapped us by making sure that once our friends were there, they couldn't leave, that it was a roach motel, by harnessing the power of the state, conscripting the state through IP law to stop people from doing unto them as they'd done unto Rupert Murdoch, by being able to trample privacy law or antitrust law, by immunizing themselves from any kind of competition by buying their direct competitors, And eventually by taming their workforce. So Sarah Wynne Williams' amazing new book, Careless People, which is her memoir of being the head of policy, global policy at Facebook, is this incredible story about how Facebook at one point was quite disciplined by their workforce because, like, you know, tech workers are very productive in the economic sense. Like, every hour a tech worker works produces a lot of money for the investors in the company. And even if you pay the tech worker a lot of money, you still make a big profit. And so when there was a huge shortage of tech workers, you kind of had to have these like town halls where you would let tech workers get mouthy with Zuck, and like people who refused to work on things wouldn't get fired and whatever. And you can see in Wynne Williams' memoir the point where it's like, actually, like, don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out. So, you know, Careless People, I think, is quite an interesting frame
because
for this.
what? Because what changed?
The supply caught up with the demand, right? They were princes of labor because they were in a high demand, and they never used...
Too many people learned to code, actually.
Yeah, they didn't use that demand power to unionize. And so if all they had was scarcity and not solidarity, then when the scarcity went away, the bargaining power went away. We've had 500,000 tech layoffs in the last 2 years. Google did a 12,000 worker layoff after an $80 billion stock buyback that would have paid their salaries for 27 years, right? Like, these are not companies that fear their workers anymore. Zuckerberg just announced he wasn't doing town halls with the workers anymore because it's, quote, not a good use of his time. And then they announced a 5% across the board layoff and doubled their executive bonuses. Like, tech workers don't have any power within those firms anymore, and they won't until they unionize. And so, the Wynne Williams' memoir, this title I find really interesting because when it starts off, you find people who are careless people in the sense that they don't care about the damage they do to other people, right? And then by the end of the book, you find that they're careless people in the sense that they don't give a fuck if you're angry at them because they know there's nothing you can do to hurt them. So there are lots of people who don't care about your well-being who still care about not making you angry. And that is what changes with Monopoly. And so that account, I think, is a much better account than dopamine hacking. I think it gets you to like the real material things that happened and not the things that these prodigal tech bros like to style themselves as being able to do because it makes them sound like they're wizards.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.